Welcome back to the channel. Today we take a deep dive into the 2025 release psychological horror thriller film that is The Woman in the Yard. So we see at the start of the film actually the films open with a very somber tone, and as we see the character of Ramona that is played by Daniel Deadweiler, and so bandaged and limping being discharged from a hospital, we see that she is physically healing but emotionally shattered, and the audience just quickly learns her husband David was killed in a car accident in which she was the driver. And her two children, we see that is Tyler and Annie, they are just survived with minor injuries. And Ramona brings them back to their remote farmhouse on the edge of wooded landscape in the American South. So she tries to act strong for them, but we can already see the signs of trauma that is just breathing beneath her surface, as we see, because they have been just through a lot of things. So you just expect them to be little uh, kind of tense and frightened. And actually the drive back to the farmhouse include many silent shots as we see just through the windshield, and that I think symbolizes the Ramona's haunted view of the world and the trauma that she is carrying. And so now back home, Ramona tries to just settle into a new routine. The farmhouse is quiet and desaturated and reflecting her emotional emptiness. She cooks for the children and reads to Annie at night and tries to help Taylor with his homework. But she is clearly distracted and Taylor has become distant, barely speaking while Annie is asking quick questions about their father's death. And the weight of being the sole caregiver and the unspoken guilt actually she carries begin to just press down on Ramona. We see here actually Taylor locks his bedroom door at night and Annie keeps drawing a figure in black that is standing outside their house. 3 days into their return, we see that Ramona noticed something strange, something unusual, or someone or something that is standing at the edge of their yard, of the home or their house, and a black dressed woman that is just entirely in black, I guess, is standing still outside facing their house. She doesn't move, she doesn't speak, or there is nothing response to Ramona's attempt to call her out. And thinking it's a local woman who might be confused or lost, Ramona leaves out a bottle of water and a coat, but they remain untouched. We see actually the camera lingers long on the woman's silhouette, and the sound design just goes silent when Ramona looks at her, emphasizing the dread actually or the condition at the point of the time when the scene is just taking place. And over the next few days, we see that woman remains in the yard, and sometimes she is closer, sometimes that is farther away. She never crosses into the house, and Ramona calls the sheriff who visited and finds no one actually. He suggests that maybe Ramona is seeing something mentioning the things from the crash, and Ramona is furious at the suggestion, but deep down she just begins to question her own sanity. That is she alright, or is she having some kind of psychological problem, or she's just hallucinating the things that are not even present around her. Meanwhile, we see that Annie says she talks to the woman at night in her dreams, and Taylor refuses to discuss anything at all. So actually, the woman represents intrusive guilt and always visible, but yet unaddressed she goes. We see that Ramona has her first major breakdown. She falls asleep in the living room, and the dreams of the crash. Actually, the flashback we see that is just fragmented in pieces because she is in the driver's seat and David is beside her, and they are arguing. Suddenly, the headlights and there is crash. So then silence, and in the dream, the black woman appears beside the wreckage and stares at Ramona, and she wakes up screaming, with blood trickling from her nose. We see that actually this scene marks the moment where guilt, the grief, or the trauma that actually fully invades Ramona's subconscious, and the woman is no longer just a kind of passive observer you would imagine, but she's part of Ramona's traumatic memory. Taylor runs away from home for several hours, and Ramona finds him in the woods behind the house. And he confesses that he saw the woman too, and multiple times, not only a single time. But he's convinced that it's not real person, or it's kind of hallucination, or it's something that is just out of this world. He believes that she is haunting them because someone, either David or something even more darker or even more sinister kind of thing, is just trying to tell them something, just trying to discuss, or just trying to spit the fact. And he accuses Ramona of not telling the full truth about what happened that night, and Ramona denies it, but she's also visibly shaken by this all incident that is just taking place around her. We see that Taylor's mistrust shows the emotional damage the family is undergoing, and the woman is not just haunting Ramona now, and she is the wedge between the mother and the son. Now we see that Ramona goes through actually David's belonging that is present in the attic region and kind of just seeking peace or perhaps the answer to all the situation or all the condition that has now just taken place, and is something unusual happening there, or she might can follow in kind of clue to just dissect this condition and solve this problem that is just being much bigger and larger than she expected at earlier. And she finds an old photograph of the farmhouse where that is from decades ago actually, and a very old one, and is stunned to see a blurry figure of the woman in the black in the background of that image. And the most striking thing about that image, when we as an audience even see that she is standing in the exact same spot where the current figure appears, so kind of just hinting at something connection between both of them. And she begins to suspect that this isn't a fragment of her imagination, maybe something or someone who has been there for a very long time. And a journal belonging to David's great grandmother contains a very cryptic entries about a woman in mourning who appears just before tragedy strikes the family. So we see that at late one night, Ramona hears the floorboards creaking and finds Annie just missing from her bed. That is just unusual because she is a little kid, and rushes outside with a flashlight and finds Annie calmly sitting in the yard beside the woman. And when Ramona screams, the woman vanishes, and Annie says softly that she says it wasn't your fault actually. And Ramona now breaks down. When she grabs Annie, pulls her back inside, and she just begins to unravel emotionally. We see that here the scene actually introduces the possibility that woman isn't actually the so-called isn't some kind of a what you can say the spirit or something that is causing harm to them. She may be a spiritual protection, offering not vengeance but kind of clarity, that what the clarity that is needed in the life. And Ramona finally admits to her children that she was fighting with the dad in the car the night he died, and she had discovered that he was having an affair and confronted him on the road. And in the heat of the argument, we see that she lost control of the wheel. She lost the control of the vehicle actually, and she has been just carrying the guilt ever since. And Taylor was initially angry and began to soften when he sees how broken she is. And then they hug, and there is no forgiveness yet, but there is step towards truth, or what is the truth that need to be just shared with all of them to have clarity in the life and actually know that what has happened behind all of this. And the confession is actually heart of the film, if you see. And the woman in the yard is not just a ghost, but she's the pressure of the truth that is trying to sacrifice, trying to just surface. That night we see that Ramona sees the woman standing closer than ever before, only a few feet from the porch, and in a moment of rage and desperation, we see Ramona lights up a torch and run towards her. The woman suddenly vanishes as flames erupt in the yard grass. But we see that Ramona just collapses, and after collapsing, she just crying as fire spreads, and Taylor runs out to extinguish the flames. When the fire is out, they find a small burnt object in the center and a cheered baby doll that Annie had lost after the accident. We see here the doll is actually representation of innocence, I guess, that is just lost, and the collateral damage of guilt that has just taken place with them, that has just happened with them, the trauma and all those things. And burning it releases something with the Ramona. The next morning we actually see the woman is gone. For the first time the yard is empty, and Ramona standing on the porch with her children. She breathes deeply and she doesn't smile, but her shoulders are just relaxed at that time. Annie says quietly that she says goodbye, and Ramona responds, I know. So the silence is no longer threatening, and it's healing. Whether the woman was real or not, no longer it just matters to them. Her purpose is complete, and Ramona has acknowledged the truth and began the healing process. And in the final scene, in the final act of the movie, we actually see that Ramona is seen repainting the living room, and Taylor is just outside chopping wood, and Annie is playing with a new doll, and life is beginning to move again. And in the closing moments, Ramona looks out the window one last time, and at the now empty yard, so no one is there actually, and the breeze rustles the tree and the screen just fades to black. I think the film ends not with the terror, but with a subtle emotional resolution that we all need in our life, that is the emotional stability, and the horror is just internal, and the resolution I think is hard on. I think if we specifically talk about the ending of the film, because there are something interpretation about this ending of the movie, because it leaves us with a more kind of emotional closure than any kind of supernatural answer, and I think that's purely intentional, entirely intentional, I guess, because as Ramona steps outside the final morning and finds the yard empty, it signals a turning point because the woman is gone, not because she was defeated, but because her purpose was just fulfilled, and that figure, whether it's a literal ghost or a manifestation of Ramona's guilt, actually I think symbolize the unresolved trauma Ramona carries since the accident, and by confronting the truth and confessing to her children and finally acknowledging the pain she has caused and endured, she releases the psychological grip that trauma had on her. And the fire in the yard represents a kind of emotional purging, and the shared doll that is left behind is more than just a prop, I guess, because it's a last piece of grief that is given the physical form, consumed and released. And the final shot of Ramona gazing out into the empty yard, I think, isn't one of fear, it's one of the peace gesture, I guess. And now we will just try to look at the second aspect of the movie, that is that woman in black is ghost or it's actually some kind of psychological trauma or suffering of Ramona's uh, guilt, fear. So we see that if you take the woman literally, I mean, she is just spirit that is tied to land and appearing when someone in the house is just harboring that is deep guilt or unresolved grief. So we see the old photo that Ramona finds. Actually, it shows the same black figure decades earlier and long before that accident, because that hints at supernatural presence that predates the family, like a guardian or sorrow or a spiritual judge, you may say. But the interpretation supports the idea that woman helped guide Ramona towards truth and healing. And if you look at the other side of the lake, that is other side of the side, that is on the other hand, the woman could be a manifestation of Ramona's trauma and guilt. And I think this is a very far logical thing to be rely on. And after all, no one even captures her on camera, and the sheriff never sees her, and her appearance intensify in sync with Ramona's emotional unraveling. And the woman may represent, I guess, Ramona's suppressed emotion, watching, waiting, and pressuring her to confess and confront the past, or confess the truth that what has happened at that night. Once Ramona dies, that woman then vanishes, and she's nowhere to be seen later after that. So I guess this depends on how you interpret the film, and but what's clear is that she isn't just there to scare, and she's there to force truth to come into the limelight that is need to be spoken. Whether ghost or grief personified, I guess the woman in the yard is a very haunting mirror of unresolved pain and a guide towards emotional reckoning. So I was expecting it to be a little cliche movie, little kind of a horror movie that you would see and expect a jump scare, cheap jump scare, and the little tonish and subtle story that we see in each and every ghost film nowadays in a horror film. That some kind of haunted thing is going there, and then the group of people is just haunted by them or something like that. But I think it exactly was not of my type actually, because I was astonished. I was just kind of relieved to see something unique, something rare of a movie. So it actually strikes me, and I think that exactly what makes this movie powerful, because it's a psychological horror, so it does not rely on the so-called cheap jump scares for deeply unsettling atmosphere and the emotional depth. I think the film is more about the story of trauma, grief, and the emotional stability that you need in your life. And the movie was actually overall good, and you could watch it many times, I guess, because it's a decent movie, you could say. It's all about the emotional bonding, the bonding between the mother and father, the bonding between the mother and son, the bonding between mother and daughter, and the character were just brilliantly written, and they were at par, I guess. There was no cheesy things in that, and the pacing was not that fast or not that slow. It was aligning with the story of the movie, and the cinematography was actually very bleak and beautiful, because we see the long and static shots of the woman standing motionless in the distance. I think that creates a sense of dread without being kind of speaking any single word to other people. And we see the sound design that just aligns it, I guess, equally chilling, and there's no dramatic music cues, or it's just eerie silence that get under your skin, I guess. So it's a kind of haunting meditation on the trauma. It's slow burning movie, I guess, and it's emotionally very raw and quite terrifying. So if you are looking for an horror film with a heart and depth, I think that's one not to be missed, and you could actually watch it with your family. I guess it's a solid horror movie, so I would give it a kind of 8.5 out of 10. So if you like such breakdowns, do like, share, and subscribe Cinema Shadows for more. Thank you for watching.